Welcome to Rise, Hope, and Healing After Sexual Betrayal. I'm MaryAnn Michaelis, and I'm so glad that you're here. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have taken a few moments to access the Grief After Betrayal Impact Scale survey that's been in the show notes, and especially for those who tried it and it didn't work. Please know we've got a new link there that's working, and we'd love to still have you try it. Thank you so much for your willingness. Also, we have a Human Intimacy Conference this Friday and Saturday, March 13th and 14th. We'd love to have you join us. I'm going to be sharing some of the results of the survey, and you'll have the opportunity to access information and speakers with over 200 years of clinical experience working with betrayed individuals and their partners. If you haven't registered yet, you can still use the promo code 30OFF to receive 30% off. And finally, if this podcast has been helpful for you, we invite you to like it, to share it, to check out our YouTube page to help us grow our algorithms and to be able to help as many people as we can. Welcome back to Rise, Hope and Healing After Sexual Betrayal. I'm MaryAnn Michaelis, and I am so excited to be here today with my friend and colleague, Darrell Brazell. Darrell, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
All right. I'm Darrell Brazell. I'm first and foremost pastor of New Hope Fellowship Church in Lawrence, Kansas, that I've pastored for, 22 years now. And we started it as a recovery church for individuals who struggle with pornography, sexual addictions, and their spouses and their families who are impacted by the traumas. And so we've been doing that for a long time. Before that, I was running groups for men, and then my wife started working with wives. So then I got to work more with couples and began to see more of the real harm that is done to wives. One of the things I always say is that in the early days of doing this work, I got to be the guy's cheerleader, and it was much simpler. And then once the wives got involved, it got really messy and much better, because then I could really learn that everything that was being shared at group, presented in group, wasn't always how things really were at home. Sometimes because guys were intentionally deceptive, oftentimes, even more often, just because they were pretty clueless and they weren't aware of the real harm. But once we started working with couples and I started having more interaction with the wives, God really just rose up a heart within me to be a protector of Eve rather than a consumer of Eve. And that's been one of my taglines for guys for many years now. Out of that, I did the full CSAT training back starting in 2017. And then did 2 years of very pretty intense training with Dr. Omar Minwalla around his model of understanding abuse, victim, and trauma, and applying that in the context of deceptive sexuality. And then help co-lead with Omar one of his Be a Better Man 2 courses. And then I've taken his content that he has that you and I are going to talk about more and applied it for men in intensive context that's become one of my favorite things to do. I call it a mountain work 22-room intensive, where this last one I did, I had 11 men for 4.5 days, just really going intensely through these rooms and helping them understand the real impact of deceptive sexuality, both in its early days when it was hidden and even many years later, even after good recovery is kicked in, and how the lingering effects, and especially any ongoing deception, how that continues to just do incredible harm to wives.
I love everything that you just said. Thank you for sharing that and for taking the time to be here. Darrell, you and I have been hanging out in the same place for lunch about once a week since 2018. Does that sound right? 2018, 2019?
Yeah, quite a while.
Yeah. And so you're somebody that I bring into my therapy room
And so for my clients, when we talk about, is this a cold versus cancer? That's something that I learned from you. I'm really grateful for everything that I learned from you over the years, but also really excited to have this conversation. Our last episode, we were closing up grief, but then Darrell, as you and I started chatting, we were talking about, hey, I'd love to have you on. I'd love to have you really talking about really validating the trauma and just exploring what could be really helpful to share in this space. We realized I don't think we're quite done with grief, which is probably really indicative of the grief process. Just when we think, okay, I'm in this great place and it's over and moving on, here's more. So, to our listeners, thank you for being with us. And Darrell, you talked a little bit about Dr. Minwalla, who you've done a lot of work with. And when you talk about him, I remember the first time I heard his name, somebody mentioned it, and they talked about the secret sexual basement. And so I don't know if you were going to go there, but I think as we're talking about grief today, we want to talk about maybe the things that we don't even realize that we're grieving for. And that's part of the work that you do with men, helping them understand. Let me paint it out for you. Let me lay out for you the impact that this has had. And so I'm just wondering, where do you want to start with this?
Yeah, the secret sexual basement, just a quick overview of that would be absolute essential beginning place. Omar has a metaphor that I think is just brilliant and very helpful. And that is just imagine a house in the suburbs with a white picket fence and a nice yard, a wife, two kids, and a dog in the house. And from the external, everything just looks like perfect Americana, just the way it should be. They go to church. He might even be a leader in their faith community, and everything seems wonderful. But if you could step back and look at the property with ground penetrating radar, what you would see is that underneath this house is a secret basement that early in the relationship, he's gone in and he's pulled the carpet back from one of the closets. He's removed the subfloor and he's dug out this basement that he then periodically or often regularly retreats to go engage in deceptive sexual behaviors. And when you look at that image that way, then you begin to realize that what's in the basement is it's certainly relevant. It certainly has impact depending upon how much is in the basement. But just the sheer fact that he created the basement in the first place is incredibly impactful on the family system. But let's just say that in this man's secret basement, he's got pornography, he's got masturbation, maybe he goes to some strip clubs, maybe he has prostitutes, maybe he has emotional affairs or full sexual affairs, whatever in there, it doesn't matter because whatever is in there is creating this toxic environment underneath the house. And so out of that toxic environment, you can almost picture toxic fumes coming up through the baseboards of the house. And so you can imagine a wife every once in a while walking around and what's that smell? There's something's off here. And the husband jumps in and says, no, honey, it's fine. It's fine. We just need to open the windows. And so let's get a little fresh air in. And so over time, what happens is that he forces her to live in a realm that Dr. Minwalla calls intentionally manipulated reality, IMR. And in intentionally manipulated reality, he's got this secret world that she knows nothing about. He has a power equation where he is in control because he has the information and she doesn't. And all the while, he is pretending to be somebody when he's upstairs and then living out his secret life whenever he's downstairs. And so there will be many times that one of the kids or the wife or somebody says, where's dad? Where is he? And they look all over the house and they can't find him. And then all of a sudden he just appears and they say, where were you? And he says, I've been here all the time. I don't understand. And so this systematic form of gaslighting can just go on and on and on. And it literally completely messes with a wife's mind because she's sensing things, but she's got no evidence. And he says everything's wonderful. And so she's just in this place of, what in the world do I do with this? And so I think one of the realities, probably I would assume most of your listeners are at least in the phase where he's tripped up, he's made a mistake, he's done something, and she's discovered the hatch. So she's pulled the carpet back, she's stuck her head down in the entry, and her eyes are huge, and she's, what in the world is this? And that's unfortunately the phase that so many wives are at. And then, unfortunately, in that place comes more gaslighting, more deception, more outright denials, more et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, out of that dysfunctional mess of a situation, Dr. Minwalla has created this metaphor that he calls a 22-room hospital of deceptive sexuality. So 22 separate rooms, and each room is designed to treat a specific harm, a specific impact that wives experience when their husbands have this secret sexual world. And this intensive that I do is taking men through those rooms, room by room, helping them just get a better glimpse, a better grasp of the real impact of what they've done and the real horrors that their wife is living through. And so when you were talking about this series you've been doing on grief and what's it like to grieve these losses, I think it could be helpful for wives, and we won't have time to do all 22 rooms. We'll just do some bits and pieces here and there. But to just gain a little perspective of, oh, okay, so this is some of the harm. This is why I feel scarred here. This is why I don't feel like I have full functionality here. This is why relationships are so hard. This is why it's so hard for me to trust others. And so that's a conversation I hope we can have over the next, we'll see how long it.
Oh, Darrell, thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, for explaining the 22 rooms. It's interesting as you were talking about that. I was reminded of years ago, I went to my mother's house and she has plants all over the place. And she had this plant that she's had for years and it was like up almost touching the ceiling. And we walked in the door and it was like, Mom, what is this smell? Your whole house just reeks. And she was like, this plant that I've had for all these years, it's blooming. And it had these big flowers on it and they smelled so horrible. And then she said this phrase that I'll never forget. She said, but don't worry, olfactory fatigue will settle in a few minutes. Within 3 to 4 minutes, you won't notice it. And so as you were talking about this noxious, poisonous, all this gas coming up and people noticing it, and yeah, we'll open the windows. Part of betrayal trauma, I think, is where with that gaslighting, where we learn to ignore it, where we become so accustomed to it, we don't even realize that it's there. Our senses are desensitized to what's going on. And that's just a small part of what you were talking about, but I definitely connected to that. You won't smell it within a few minutes. It'll be gone, even though it's there and it's so strong. I really appreciate you sharing that secret sexual basement because that is such a foundation for our conversation. And what I'm really excited about is I think as a betrayed partner, oftentimes a phrase that we use quite often is we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And when someone can come and say, let me put some words to that. Let me help you make sense of your reality and give you some words and give you a framework for your mind to make sense of that. Oh, it helps settle the nervous system. And it also says, oh, now that connects. Now I can make sense of what I do with this. Michelle Mays talks about when a house burns down, no question about it. Where are the edges? Where did it start? Where did it stop? But with betrayal trauma, there's no edges to it. Having a voice, putting words to the experience, I think is an important part of building our stories, which is part of our healing.
And one of the reasons why it's hard to have edges and where did it start, et cetera, is that for most couples, it began before the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
It was already in existence. So I've worked with just maybe 2 or 3 men in all my years who started their deceptive sexual behavior post-marriage.
Right.
The vast majority, it began in adolescence, even pre-adolescence, especially to those who were victims of childhood sexual abuse of any kind. And so it's always been in the background. So I think one of the realities that wives deal with is that there's never been a time that it didn't exist. There's only been the time since they were aware that it existed.
Mm-hmm.
And even there's often the sense of, I was aware that it existed, but I thought it was this. And now I'm discovering it's this. And in reality, my arms aren't long enough to describe how big it often is.
And I see partners often afraid to even ask.
Terrified.
Or he told me something and it's been 15 years and I've never asked again because I don't even want to know, because then I'll have to know and I can't not know. And it's too painful. So when we begin this conversation about grieving and not knowing what we don't know, where would you start with that, Darrell?
I think the room 2 of Minwalla's hospital illustration, I think, is one of the most impactful rooms. And it's actually where I begin when I teach the guys at the intensive. It's called room 2. It's in the erosion of the enteric system or the second brain injury. And enteric system is a big word.
You got to break that down, Darrell.
Yeah. Enteric system is the flow of information that takes place from our gut to our brain. Really, not just our gut, but our whole body, but especially in our gut. So think of it this way. How many times have you thought to yourself or heard others say, I knew something in my gut? I didn't have evidence. I didn't have proof, but I just knew it deep within me. Okay, that's our enteric system at work.
For anybody who's ever watched NCIS, they always talk about Gibbs, his gut. And our gut is our second brain. And we often talk about that immediate safety sensation, but we've got 90% of our safety actually is coming from our gut area, not the brain area.
So what's helpful to recognize then is what the real impact of gaslighting is. Okay. So let's just take a classic situation, and just side note, I do know that betrayal happens other way as well, that there are betrayals where women are betraying men. Okay. I work with betraying men. And so I'm going to give you my examples based in that regard. I do know it goes the other way around. It has very similar paths, similar effects, but the examples I use, I'm going to be talking about a betraying husband and a betrayed wife. Okay. So going back to that secret sexual basement image. So here's a wife. Imagine a wife who longs to be connected, wants to be close to her husband, and she's smelling the fumes. She's picking up on something's not right. Their sexual relationship is not good. He seems disconnected. He seems uninterested, and typically men fall on 1 or 2 ditches here. Either they're uninterested because they're taking care of themselves through their own deceptive sexual behaviors, or else they're in this heightened, always pushing, demanding, expecting sex, et cetera, a great deal of sexual entitlement. Sometimes it's a flip-flopping back and forth. Sometimes it's a mixture of both of those things. But the bottom line is the wife has this sense of something's off. Something's not good, especially in the sexual relationship. And she may even bring up questions. She may even ask him, are you looking at porn? Or, hey, is everything okay? Something feels off. And then he says the classic line, no, everything is fine. It's the 4-letter F word. Okay. Everything is fine. And now she has this incredible, difficult choice that I either have to choose to trust my gut or I have to trust my primary attachment. With the realization, whether it's conscious or unconscious, that whichever I choose is going to harm the other.
I lose either way.
Lose, lose, double bind. If I trust my gut, then I run the risk of harming my primary connection with my primary attachment. And thus I risk abandonment. I risk rejection. I risk, et cetera, et cetera. Or if I trust my primary attachment, then I lose more connection with myself.
Right.
Okay. But I don't know how much your listeners know of attachment models and attachment styles, but especially for the anxiously attached wife, a wife who is constantly seeking for connection with her husband, for self-regulation, for knowing who she is, et cetera, then this situation especially puts her in an impossible place because she doesn't know how to be okay without him helping her be okay. And especially for anxiously attached wives, it's almost not even a choice. I have to choose to believe him, even though my gut and everything within me is telling me something's wrong, he's lying to me, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a result of that, she pushes away her gut and she believes his words. And she lives in the wake of his intentionally manipulated reality, his IMR.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying, this is our world. This is what it looks like. Her experience is saying, that's not what I'm sensing, feeling, picking up on. But if I want to stay close and connected to you, I have to accept your words. And so she loses connection with her gut.
Yeah, can I speak to that for just a second? Because that space right there, I think, is such deep, deep wounding. It's what I usually refer to as self-betrayal, because you're talking about, I have to dissociate myself. I have to disconnect myself from myself. So it's a total self-abandonment.
Absolutely.
It is like a psychic, deep soul. I don't have the words. I don't have enough words to describe that abandonment that happens when we abandon ourselves.
And the impact of that has a ripple effect through every aspect of a woman's life. It impacts how she relates to her children, because she then, in order to stay connected to him, often feels pressure to smooth things over and make things good with the father-child relationship. It impacts her physical health.
So as I hear you say that, what I'm connecting with then is that means that she's losing her voice.
She's losing her voice.
But the thing she thinks, who she really authentically is, she is smothering or abandoning or suppressing and putting down in favor of the smoothed over relationship, which is all self-protection.
It's all self-protection. It's all survival mode, because my survival instinct is saying, I need this connection. I need my primary attachment. And so in order to be with my primary attachment, I have to push down my gut. I have to, Michelle Mays has a great expression she uses, betrayal blindness. Betrayal blindness becomes a necessity for survival.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I talk to my guys about a lot in this context is, if you could measure your wife's ability to be a good mom on a scale of 1 to 100, wherever she was in that, you have to recognize that this kind of environment greatly reduces her ability to be the kind of mom that she wants to be, that she could be if you were fostering a healthy environment for her.
Right, so she's not blossoming.
She is not blossoming. So instead of being a 93 mom, she's a 64 mom.
or 48.
Yes, I'll let the mom say that. Okay. And
Darrell,
she knows
and
it.
she knows it and she hates it. And she has
And
shame about it.
and she has shame about it. And there's a whole other room that we'll talk about as far as the impact it has on children, grown kids, etc. Then it also has great impacts on her physical health. Okay. Gabor Mate's book, Myth of Normal, he does a fantastic job talking about the impact of traumatic events and especially stress and cortisol on the human body. And one of the things he says in there that really stood out to me is he talks about the individuals he finds who have the greatest harm or the greatest percentage of cancer, autoimmune, irritable bowel syndrome, those kind of gut issues are angry women who have to suppress it.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And so think of that in the context of this room 2, second brain injury, that I need to be connected. So what am I doing? I'm suppressing my hurt. I'm suppressing my anger. I'm suppressing these feelings because he's telling me everything's fine. And my gut's telling me it's not fine. It's far from fine. And so the anger, the confusion, it wreaks havoc on her physical body. And out of that, there's a significant increase in especially autoimmune diseases, issues of the gut, even cancer issues. I think we have to be real careful there because you can't draw direct lines,
Right.
but you can certainly see correlations.
And I've had multiple clients who've had really big health issues who've said, I wonder if there's something there. So, to our listeners, if you haven't taken our grief survey, the grief after betrayal impact scale, there's a link in our show notes. This is actually one of the questions that we are asking because we know that there's no research on it. And we want to know within the past 2 years of discovering betrayal or being betrayed, we want to know, is there a connection here? Because you and I can talk about it. We see it in our clients, but there's nothing we have to validate that that exists. But there's no way that it couldn't impact us that way because we've got this conflict within ourselves. We're not at peace within ourselves. And all of those emotions that you're talking about, they have to go somewhere. And if
Right.
they don't go out, then they're staying in, and that's where we get sick. And if we look at the adverse childhood experiences, that scientifically validates what you're talking about here as well.
Sure.
Right. What else? Is there more in this room?
I think a close connection to this room, the second brain room, is actually a room that I added. Dr. Minwalla is a secular psychologist.
Mhm.
I'm a pastor for literally my whole life since 19 years old when I got my first ministry job. And so I've spent my whole life in ministry. And when I was going through the 22 rooms with Dr. Minwalla, he has a room about existential trauma and just mentions that it has impact on people in their faith and their faith community. And I have literally just story after story, experience after experience of how wives have been deeply impacted by the trauma of living with their husband who has this secret sexual basement. And that's especially magnified if their husband has any type of leadership role or any type of position within the faith community. But where I want to circle it back to, first of all, though, is just what happens when this room 2 takes effect. Okay. So when a woman loses the ability to trust her gut, guess what it also impacts? It impacts her ability to hear from God.
Mhm.
Okay. And the way it does that is there's a great story in the Old Testament where Elijah has had this great battle and he's conquered all the false prophets. But then he gets word that Jezebel wants his head. So he runs off in the wilderness and he hides from her. And God just comes to him and says, okay, Elijah, stop your pity party, come outside, meet with me. And God sends fire, wind, and storm, all very loud, earthquake. He sends these very loud, abrupt things. And then after each one of those things, it says, but God was not in the fire. He was not in the wind. He was not in the earthquake. And then it says, then there was a still small whisper. And it was God in the whisper. And I want you to just think about that for a moment in this context of years of shoving down my gut, not listening to myself. How difficult does that make it to hear the whisper?
Right.
And so I've added a 23rd room I call her distorted, damaged perspectives on God. Because through living with his IMR, living with the ways that he's sometimes outright lied, looked her in the eyes, lied about things, for the many, many times he lied by leaving things out, by conveniently not bringing things up, he has left her to where it's like there's earplugs in and she can't hear the whisper anymore. And then you add on to that the countless impacts that have happened that add to that sense of betrayal, that sense of where was God when? A felt sense of betrayal by God. Many wives talk about, prayed. I thought for sure God had told me, this is the man I want you to marry. God, if you knew he was going to do this to me, why would you lead me to marry him? Or many wives have said, where was God when he started acting out? God, why didn't you show this to me 20 years ago before I had 3 kids with him and was now trapped in this place? Okay. God, where were you when he was gaslighting me? Or especially then it gets complicated. Where were you when the pastor, church leader, mentor, etc., told me to submit, or that it's somehow my fault?
And you take that back to, especially if my spouse or partner was that church leader.
Yeah.
So damaging.
Yeah.
And so convoluted and
so common.
So much chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, where was God when he refused to get help? I knew we were in trouble. I got online. I found resources. I put them in front of him. And he said, nah, I don't want to do that. I won't do it anymore. We're good.
And I think there's also another aspect in this faith space that we're talking about where I have clients tell me, like, I've been praying, I've been searching, I've been trying to connect with God for years to try and understand what has been going on. And I got nothing. I'm so glad you're talking about this other room that you've added, this deep faith connection to my higher power, whatever that looks like, room, because I have so many clients who were betraying everything that I thought I learned, everything that I thought I believed about God, about him loving me and being there for me. And no, with this betrayal with my husband, oftentimes there is a wounding and there's a betrayal with that higher power place. And I love what you're talking about, just how complex it is as it's tied into trying to make sense of our world and reality. And we're talking about deep grief work. We've just really touched on a couple of areas of that. And so I really look forward to continuing this conversation. So to our listeners and viewers who we thought we were going to be done with grief, we're going to continue some of these conversations with you, Darrell, so that we can continue to explore this a little bit more. Is there anything that you want to share before we wrap up?
I guess maybe a good place to close and wrap that up together is that one of the phrases I use both for men in recovery and for betrayed wives who are in recovery. I don't know where it came from or if it was just something kind of God gave me, but for many years now, I've been saying that Those who do well in recovery are those who learn to grieve well. We don't have the ability to go back in time and redo any of these things. But what we do have the ability to do is look at them honestly, name them, go through the process of grief, and find ourselves on the other side stronger, healthier, and in the process of healing. And that's what grief work is about looking honestly at the harms and finding ways to learn how we've grown through those in spite of that, and to discover that we have a greater resiliency to us than we ever thought was possible.
I love that, Darrell. And in one of my trainings, I remember they talk about when you're going through a dark tunnel, when you're in the middle of it is not usually the place to take your foot off the pedal. It's stuck there. And so it is continuing to face it going through. And so I'm really grateful for everything you've shared today, this conversation. And to our listeners and viewers, we've talked about some hard things today. And so please get a drink of water, go out, take a walk, take care of yourself, because I know that we might have stirred some things up. We may be talking about things that, oh, I didn't realize this was an area I hadn't even thought about. Thank you. Thank you for bringing more grief to my table, MaryAnn and Darrel. And that's the case. Please reach out for some help and support, and know that there is hope and there is light ahead. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Darrell. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.